All right, well, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on using TV and movies to improve your language skills. It's a fun topic. We've had a good time brainstorming and researching about it, and we hope that you will enjoy some of the ideas that we've come up with and that this will be a jumping off point for you to more effectively use movies and TV in your language study, whether you have a class or you don't have a class right now. Okay, so a few things that this webinar will address. First, we'll talk about the benefits of watching TV and films for language learning. We'll talk about how to find things to watch. We'll also talk about some suggested activities, and then we'll also recommend specific shows or films by language. And as I said, if you have questions, please do keep those coming in the chat. We're happy to answer and address those while we're talking or at the end in our Q&A session. So as we talk about the benefits of watching TV and films for language learning, there really are a lot. Some of the ones that we have come up with are that you really get to see culture in action, native speakers interacting with native speakers in real ways or simulated ways. But you can actually see that culture in action. It can be a really great learning opportunity. There's also real or semi-real, if it's scripted, language that you get exposure to, which is really a great source of authentic material and authentic interaction. You can also see realistic body language and nonverbal cues from the actors. And so you can also pick up how people in the target culture do that as well. One good thing about watching movies or videos is that there is a lot of visual support for the audio that you're hearing. So it helps add a layer of help for when you're trying to comprehend and understand. There's also no participation required. You can watch the interactions happen and no one is going to expect you to respond or to talk or ask questions. So you can kind of sit back and observe and take in without being an active participant. And then finally, it's just entertaining and fun. And we spend enough time, I'm sure, as we're at home watching TV and films, we might as well try and do it a little more productively. So a few words of caution as we're getting into this. Don't expect magic results. You might hear a lot of anecdotal stories about people who didn't know anything, and then after 3 months of watching Spanish soap operas, they were fluent, or people becoming fluent just by watching fill in the blank. Those results are not typical, and I would not expect them of yourself. So yeah, I think you realize learning a language requires a little more effort than that. It's also not learning through osmosis. So you can't just sit back and watch TV and films and expect to magically learn the language. It does require a blend of being an active learner as well as a passive learner. So there are times when you can just sit back and enjoy, but unless you're actively paying attention to certain grammar or vocabulary things, you're really not going to pick up that much. So it does require a mix. Okay, next is finding something to watch. There are some questions to consider as you're trying to decide, as you're scrolling through what it is that you want to watch. And we have just a few recommendations for each. So the first is really important. What do you want to watch? Remember that this should be fun, and so you should watch what's entertaining to you. You want to pick something that's engaging and not something that's going to be boring, that makes it sort of another homework assignment or something that isn't engaging. Find something fun that you want to watch. Okay. The next consideration is what kind of language is being used in the show that you are watching. What we listen to is typically how we talk. And so if you're listening to a model that isn't real, that isn't accurate for how people talk today, and the language they actually use, it may not be the best source. So for that case, we say avoid period dramas and also beware of accent. So if you want to learn how to speak with a standard accent, watch something with a standard accent. If you're learning English, Downton Abbey may not be the best source unless you want to talk like an English lord. So what kind of shows have realistic language? Take a minute in the chat and chat out some ideas of what kinds of shows you think would have more realistic language that would be a good model for you for language learning. Okay, we've got soap operas, sitcoms, reality TV. Yes, reality TV for sure. People just being people. Family dramas, documentaries. Okay. So some of the ideas that we had included, of course, reality TV, interviews, whether it's in a news report or people just talking on the street, you can find on YouTube. Game shows are also a good place to hear people just talking the way people talk. How-to videos that you can find on YouTube. And then also shows kind of set in the modern era. So sitcoms, etc. Yeah, someone's saying children's shows my level. We are getting to that. So what is appropriate for your level? That's the next question that you really should consider. So for beginners, you want to look for things with predictable or familiar storylines. Sometimes formulaic series or things that follow a pattern are very helpful. You also want something with slow, clear, and standard speech with a lot of familiar vocabulary. So, as one of our participants said, children's shows are a good choice for that. They're educational in nature already. And yeah, they have a lot of these features. Movies that you've already seen in English may be a good source as well, if you can find them dubbed into the target language. Short explanatory videos on YouTube, especially if they have a lot of visual support. And then documentaries on familiar topics. So the more you already know about something, the easier it is for you to understand. So even if you're a beginner, don't shy away from documentaries. Just maybe try and pick ones that are on topics you're already familiar with or that might have a lot of vocabulary that you already know. Okay, if you're a more intermediate learner, the kinds of things that you want to look for in your shows are clear speech, factual content rather than dealing with a lot of abstract ideas or opinions, uncomplicated plots that have a lot of visual support. And again, formulaic series, things that follow similar patterns over shows. So for intermediate level, you may want to try series, especially for teens. They tend to be less complicated than shows for adults. And sitcoms. There was an anecdotal story, again, about baseball players in the US learning English just by watching Friends. So, you know, something like that that's fairly predictable, fairly simple content may be really helpful if you can find the equivalent in your target language. Documentaries and news programs are also great for intermediate learners. More mainstream films, so nothing that is really, with mainstream films, they tend to be more predictable, right? So something like that. And then also action movies and crime and mystery. So action movies, people tend to talk about what they're seeing on the screen or what's happening around them. And so that way there's a lot of visual support. And then also crime and mystery. There's nothing more formulaic than an Agatha Christie, right? Who done it? So they typically follow a similar pattern across shows, and that can be a help for some people. Okay, if you're a more advanced learner, then you are prepared for more things like idioms and slang, non-standard dialects, complex plots, or dry or dark humor. So some of the shows that you might want to try include more complex or artistic films, maybe things that are nominated for Oscars more often, darker comedies or dramas. Stand-up comedy could also be something that you might be interested in watching, as well as reality TV. So again, you have real people talking the way that real people do. And then if you're at a more advanced level, you may be ready for historical films, but just keep in mind that the language that you're hearing may not be authentic to the way that people talk today. So those are some guidelines, but again, the most important thing is you want to watch something that's going to be entertaining and interesting for you. Okay. All right, another consideration is if you can find movies that are dubbed. So movies that are made maybe for the US, but are dubbed into your target language. So there are some countries that love dubbing, other countries that avoid it and use pretty much only subtitles. So the countries that love dubbing, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and you can see in this list of audio options for, I think, Avengers Endgame, you can see languages that go with those countries. Some countries love overdubbing. So like if you're a Russian student, you may find that a lot of movies, they get dubbed into Russian, but you can still hear the English underneath. That may be less effective for language learning because it's too much noise. It might be hard to process the actual language that you're trying to focus on. So that's something to consider if you're learning one of those languages. And then some countries avoid dubbing altogether and they only do subtitles. And again, you can see some of the languages associated with these countries in the list that doesn't offer the audio, but it does offer the subtitles. One thing that I did notice is that I looked at Frozen 2 to see what audio options there were, and Swedish and Dutch were included as audio options. So if you're learning one of the languages that from a country that hates dubbing, try looking at a kids show and you may find some more options there for cartoons and things like that. And here we are, moving on to subtitles. We had a question about subtitles. And there are a lot of different kinds of subtitles and some available for on different platforms or for different purposes. Reverse subtitles are maybe a little bit of a passive approach where you're watching an English movie and you're just watching it with the target language subtitles. This can help you pick up vocabulary, but it's probably not the most effective use of TV for language learning. English subtitles are great, especially if you're a beginner learner. It can provide a lot of needed support at the beginning as you're just trying to figure out the plots. Target language subtitles are probably the best kind of subtitles that you can use. It's like sort of the bang for your buck as far as subtitles. You can pick up a lot of grammar and vocabulary. Research has shown that watching television with target language subtitles has increased those areas, and so that can be really effective. Another option is dual subtitles, so having subtitles in both languages. This gives you a lot of information because you can see the English and the target language at the same time, but sometimes it might be too much. And so if you do have a player, like this, for example, is language learning for Netflix. If you are watching a player that has dual subtitles, maybe only focus on the target language subtitles and then check the English ones when you need them, but don't try to do both at the same time. It might be a little too much. And then finally, where can you find things to watch? Of course, you want to check first with your favorite streaming apps. One that you may not be aware of is TED. TED Talks are available in other languages, and you can search on their webpage by language. So you may want to check that out. They do have a fairly wide variety of languages available. YouTube, of course, is a gold mine that you're aware of. A channel that I was not aware of is Easy Languages, and they have man on the street interviews a lot of time. People just kind of talking in real ways about real simple kinds of things. And then they also have the dual subtitle option on Easy Languages. And then you also may want to check out National Public TV online. So whatever the equivalent is of PBS in the country that speaks your target language. So there's a couple additional ideas to your Netflix, your Amazon Prime, etc. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some suggested activities, things that you can do to be more effective. We have a list of these, a handout that we're going to share in the chat before the end of the webinar, so don't feel like you have to write everything down. We may go through them kind of quickly, but again, if you have any questions, we can discuss specific ones in more detail in the question and answer session. So, but before we talk about activities, we really want to identify like what your purpose is for watching TV for language use. What are you hoping to get out of it? And maybe you want to put in the chat a couple ideas about like what's your purpose, why you would try and watch TV or films to learn a language. So go ahead, you can start typing your ideas. Okay, someone says to improve sentence structure. Sentence structure, maybe grammatical, vocabulary acquisition. Getting a variety of vocabulary. Improving your accent, great. Okay, and gaining fluency because you can't interact with people during the pandemic, great. Perfect. Well, there are a lot of purposes. There are a lot of reasons why you may want to use TV, including the ones that you mentioned and the ones that we have listed here. And choosing the activities and the strategies that really are best matched to your purpose is going to give you the most bang for your buck again. So, so you really do want to pick an activity that really matches your purpose. So think about that as we're going through these activities and think what's really going to help me with what I'm hoping to get out of this. So for those of you who do just want more exposure to the language, or for you who are very new beginners, you may just want to sit back and watch the movie. This is beneficial if you're actively paying attention and you're listening to the sounds and the rhythms of the language. You're trying to pick up main plot points and ideas, but also it's important that as you do this, you listen for high frequency vocabulary words. This is a really great approach for beginners, and you shouldn't be worried about trying to catch everything, but you can pick up a lot of high frequency words just by kind of sitting back and watching and listening and enjoying. So another thing that might help, especially beginner learners or even more advanced learners, is to look up the plot summary before you watch. Then you can watch without subtitles or with subtitles. But the really nice thing about this is it allows you to preview the plot before you watch. And so you have this background knowledge that you can take with you into the watching experience. You may not like spoilers, but the more that you know in advance, the easier it will be to understand. And this definitely gives beginning learners a lot of support as they're trying to listen. Okay, another one is to listen for filler words and expressions that are inserted into speech in the target language that you're studying. So when you are trying to speak the language, then you can try and use these fillers instead of your English uhs and ums. This is really great because, first of all, it raises your awareness of how people actually are communicating and using those words in the target language. And then when you speak, it'll help you sound a lot more natural and a lot more native if you use the words that they use instead of your English equivalents. Okay, another one is to watch with subtitles, but also with a dictionary. You don't want to be pausing, stopping, looking up every unfamiliar word, but the ones that show up again and again, repeatedly used high frequency words, if you don't understand those, you may want to write it down and look it up later, or pause the movie if it's really important, and you can look it up while you're watching. This is great for beginners when you're trying to acquire a lot of vocabulary, and it really focuses your attention on building the vocabulary. If you're a little bit more advanced, this might be a good tip for you. So while you're watching, you take notes on the plot, but also words that you hear, target language words. And then later, after you finish watching a scene or the whole movie or whole episode, you can use your notes to summarize the show, what you saw. I really like this because it gives you a focus while you're listening. You're listening for keywords, you're listening for main ideas and plot points. And then it can also help improve your speaking skills, especially if you're trying to get a level 2, where narrating and summarizing is a really important skill for you. It's also a skill that maybe you might use in the real world if you have to attend meetings and things like that. Another idea is to watch a scene multiple times, transcribe what you're hearing, so you can watch it without target language subtitles. Transcribe what you think you're hearing, and then watch it with the subtitles and compare what you wrote. You can also look up any unknown words. This one is really nice because it connects the sounds that we hear with how things are written. Like English, all languages have expressions or we run sounds together that they're just not 100% clear. Each word is not distinct. And this will really help raise your awareness of how native speakers speak and how that's different than maybe what you can read. And because you're paying attention to the subtitles and actually writing what you're hearing, it can really help build your vocabulary and your grammar. Some other activity ideas are to watch and rewatch the same movie or specific scenes in a movie or a TV show. The first time with subtitles, then in a specific scene, remove the subtitles, see what you can understand. You can watch it again with the subtitles if you want and look up additional words and phrases, and then watch it again without the subtitles. Again, this is important to choose a show that you find really engaging so that you won't get tired of watching it multiple times. But these multiple viewings really allow you to kind of delve in deep and really understand what it is that is being expressed. And then each time that you view, it gives you a different level of support. And it allows you to see your progress as well as you're learning. The first time, maybe you couldn't have understood anything without the subtitles, but on repeated listenings, you might be surprised at how much you do understand. So, and this is one, if you're trying to improve your pronunciation, this might be an idea. You can record the audio from the video. So using Audacity or another audio recording tool, then you have the audio on your phone or whatever, and you can listen to it while you're doing other things. And if you're at home, like cooking dinner or something as opposed to out in public, you may even try to mimic the speech that you hear. So listen and mimic and say along with what they're saying. And that might help you practice pronunciation. I like this one because without the visual support, the listening comprehension itself becomes a little bit harder. And so that adds to the challenge if you're ready for a challenge. You get more accustomed to natural language, and it helps you with more natural production if you're practicing those speech patterns. Again, be careful what your model is, right? We don't want to end up talking like Lord Grantham from Downton Abbey all the time. We now are going to give you some suggested shows or films by language, and we're going to do that by uploading it here in the chat. So first, check out our list. We tried to include the languages that are most commonly taught at DLS, but if your language isn't on our list, we're sorry. But you can do a quick online search. You can also check your streaming service and search that way for movies and shows in your language. And then of course you can ask your instructor for ideas as well. So in conclusion, we hope that you will be able to watch shows that you enjoy, but be aware of potential challenges that may come up depending on the genre, the type of show that you're picking. Please don't obsess over understanding 100% of what you're hearing. It helps to watch with a purpose and then choose activities that best match your purpose. You do want to find a good balance between active and passive listening. Don't try to be active 100% of the time, but also don't just sit back and expect to learn through osmosis. And then experiment with a variety of activities and find what eventually will work for you. And then finally enjoy, have fun watching television. So we hope now that you will be able to identify one of these activities or one of these strategies and implement it the next time that you sit down to stream a movie or show in your target language.